At the moment, if you want a hybrid compact crossover in America and you don't want to spend more than $50,000, you have just two options. This very blue Toyota RAV4 hybrid right over here to my left. This is our long-term test vehicle, so we will have a number of videos on this vehicle coming out over the next few months. And then we have this black option right over here. This is the Mitsubishi Outlander plug-in hybrid. But the landscape is going to be changing drastically for 2020 because 2020 is bringing us an all-new Ford Escape hybrid and a Honda CR-V hybrid. Those are going to compete very directly with this Toyota RAV4 hybrid over here. And then we have an Escape plug-in hybrid and a RAV4 plug-in hybrid that will compete very directly with this Mitsubishi Outlander to my right. So it may sound crazy to be comparing plug-in hybrid to hybrid right now, but again, at the moment in 2019, these are your only two options. If you want to go down a size category, there are a number of other vehicles that you could choose from. And if you want to go up into something like a Toyota Highlander or an Acura MDX, they offer hybrid systems as well. But again, in the compact category, under about $45,000 or so, these are the two options at this exact moment. This one is a plug-in hybrid, which means it has an electric-only range of up to about 22 miles. And this one over here is a regular hybrid, which means you never need to plug it in at all. From the outside, the RAV4 over here definitely looks fresher. We have full LED headlamps, even though we do have halogen fog lamps down below, and the overall design is brand new for 2019. Toyota completely redesigned the vehicle for the 2019 model year, and that includes the engines under the hood. Over here with the Mitsubishi Outlander, this has been on sale around the world for some time. It dates back to 2013. There was a refresh in 2015, a refresh in 2018, but the basics of this model go all the way back to 2013. Now, it's worth noting that for 2020, around the world, there are some changes to the Outlander plug-in hybrid, but those are not coming to America for the 2020 model year. So we are looking at this Mitsubishi Outlander as a 2020. The older design is a little bit noticeable up front. This definitely looks like some of Mitsubishi's older vehicles in their lineup, and we still find halogen headlamps, although they are projectors up front. When it comes to active safety, the RAV4 is the clear winner here because Toyota has decided to bundle most of their latest active safety technologies standard in even the base trims of the RAV4. And that really makes a big deal because this model right here is a lower to mid-end trim of the RAV4 hybrid. It has radar adaptive cruise control, autonomous braking, pedestrian detection, all that sort of stuff going on. And this Mitsubishi Outlander here is more of a middle to upper end trim. It is definitely more expensive as we have these two models configured, and this does not get radar adaptive cruise control until you step up to the very top end models. What's the difference between a hybrid and a plug-in hybrid? We definitely need to cover that right now. In essence, a plug-in hybrid system is just a hybrid with a bigger battery pack. It's a battery pack that you can charge at home, and then you can use that energy to offset some or all of your gasoline consumption as you drive down the road. That's exactly what's going on here under the hood of this Mitsubishi Outlander. We have a 12 kilowatt hour lithium-ion battery pack. It's back there in the cargo area. We'll look at that in a moment, versus the RAV4 hybrid over there that has about a 1.5 kilowatt hour battery pack. So again, you would charge that battery pack by plugging it in at home. If you have access to a 110 volt charger, it could take up to about 12 hours. At 240 volts, that would drop it down a little bit more than half. And if you have access to a DC fast charge station, you could get this from 0 to full in about 45 minutes or so. Because this is a plug-in hybrid system and we have that bigger battery pack in the rear, the gasoline engine under the hood doesn't produce as much power as the engine under the hood of the RAV4. But these two systems on paper come in fairly similar. This produces 190 horsepower total. The Toyota RAV4 hybrid system produces 219 horsepower total. But there's a catch that you should know about with the Mitsubishi system. Below about 90 miles an hour or so, this system can only give you about 160 horsepower. That's just due to the overall design of this particular hybrid system. If you want to know more about that, I have a complete video on my channel where I go into excruciating detail of exactly how this Mitsubishi hybrid system works, the pros, the cons, and things that you should definitely know about. Meanwhile, this hybrid system over here in the RAV4, this will definitely give you 219 horsepower at very usable speeds in America. And that's why this RAV4 is significantly faster 0 to 60 than this Mitsubishi Outlander on my right. The relative compromises of a plug-in hybrid system are also why this Mitsubishi Outlander gives you 25 miles per gallon after that 22 miles of EV range have been exhausted, and this Toyota RAV4 over here will give you 40 miles per gallon all the time. Going in for a deeper dive, under the hood of the RAV4 we have a 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine. It produces 176 horsepower all on its own. That's another important consideration when comparing these two vehicles back to back. After the battery in the RAV4 is fully exhausted, say if you're going up a very long, steep mountain pass, you would still have 176 horsepower available. Under this hood, if the battery is completely exhausted, you would have just 117 horsepower available, but there's also another catch there, and that is that this is a serial hybrid system. So if you're going up those long, steep mountain passes, you're going to need extra torque. So this vehicle is going to have to move to its serial hybrid mode of operation. That's the only mode this will operate in below about 45 miles an hour or so. And in that mode, you would only have 94 horsepower total once the battery is completely exhausted. And that's why Mitsubishi gives you a charge mode in this vehicle. So you have the option of bringing this battery up to a much higher state of charge so that way you can go up those long mountain passes without reduced performance. So if you remember to engage charge mode in the Mitsubishi Outlander before you head up the Continental Divide, then this will give you the same level of performance that you got before. When the Outlander plug-in hybrid first launched, they made a big deal out of the fact that this was not only the first plug-in hybrid crossover or SUV in the world, but this also has all-wheel drive. And that's still going to be a differentiator when we start seeing more and more plug-in hybrids available in this segment, because we know that the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid is not going to be all-wheel drive. If you want all-wheel drive, you'll have to get the regular hybrid like this RAV4 over here. We don't know whether the plug-in hybrid version of the RAV4 will be front-wheel drive only, but I suspect it probably will. So even when the RAV4 is available with a plug, it still may not be a direct competitor to this Mitsubishi over here. Now on the downside, the Mitsubishi has less ground clearance than the RAV4. This gets 8.1 inches of ground clearance. This one over here has 7.3. But the Mitsubishi has the ability to send more power to its rear axle. We have two 80 horsepower electric motors on the Outlander plug-in hybrid. One in the back that produces 80 horsepower and 144 pound-feet of torque. One on the front axle that produces 80 horsepower and 101 pound-feet of torque. You might be wondering, why is the front axle a little bit less torquey than the rear? Well, that's because the front axle can combine power from the electric motor and the gasoline engine when it needs to. Meanwhile, over here in the RAV4, we get a much less powerful electric motor in the rear, 54 horsepower and 89 pound-feet of torque. So if you really need to be able to send extra power and extra torque to the rear axle to get out of a sticky situation, the Outlander is going to be more sure-footed in those situations, and there's a mode to try and lock power going to the front axle and the rear axle together 50-50. Meanwhile, over here in the RAV4, it's a little bit less capable, but I have to say that this RAV4 hybrid has definitely surprised me in terms of its off-road ability. If you're looking for high-efficiency towing, the RAV4 here definitely wins because the towing rating on this is 1,750 pounds, just a hair higher than that Mitsubishi Outlander right over there. But it's worth noting that there aren't very many hybrids or plug-in hybrid vehicles out there with rated towing capacities, so the fact that either of these vehicles is designed to tow anything really is kind of an interesting twist. So which hybrid system is right for you? That really depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for the lowest cost to operate, that is likely going to be this RAV4 over here. But if you're specifically looking for an all-wheel drive plug-in hybrid crossover with a decent price point, then that's going to be this model right over here, because it will allow you to shift those first 22 miles over to electric consumption versus always running on gasoline like this RAV4 over here. But that's not necessarily going to save you money. Let's dive into those realities right now. Assuming you pay $3 a gallon, which is pretty low for America at the moment, and 12 cents per kilowatt hour, which is definitely on the low side as well. In the United States at the moment, the average electric cost varies from around 28 cents a kilowatt hour down to about 10 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on where you live. But again, at 12 cents a kilowatt hour and $3 a gallon, this RAV4 here will cost you $1.88 to drive 25 miles. Now, this Mitsubishi Outlander over here, it will be a little bit less, but there's a catch. That first 22 miles will cost you less, and then the next 3 miles will start bumping up that cost to get closer to the RAV4 here, $1.55 overall for driving 25 miles. But if you were to drive this Mitsubishi Outlander on gasoline alone, it is nearly double this RAV4 over here to operate at $3 in order to drive just 25 miles. According to the EPA and their easily available online calculator, this vehicle should cost the average driver $1,100 a year to fuel versus $1,300 for the Mitsubishi Outlander, because the Mitsubishi Outlander is less efficient on gasoline. Now, what happens if you're in a higher cost state? Say you pay $4 a gallon or 22 cents per kilowatt hour. Then the math is definitely more in favor of the RAV4 here. Driving 25 miles would take just $2.50 over here in the RAV4, $2.66 over there in the Mitsubishi Outlander, assuming you're starting out on electricity, $4 if you aren't. That brings our yearly total up to $1,950 for that Mitsubishi Outlander, $1,500 for this RAV4 right over here. So if you're concerned about the potential of rising future energy costs, the RAV4 is going to be your better insulator against that. However, I realize that a lot of folks out there are not interested in efficiency, they're simply interested in electrification, and they want a vehicle that will drive electric only. And at the moment, this Mitsubishi Outlander is going to be your only option. But for 2020, Toyota is going to give us a plug-in hybrid RAV4, and we have a new plug-in hybrid Ford Escape as well. We don't know anything about the fuel economy of the upcoming Ford or the upcoming Toyota yet, so stay tuned for a video on those later. But I suspect, based on their overall design, that the RAV4 plug-in hybrid and the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid are likely going to be both a little bit more efficient than this Mitsubishi. When it comes to overall size, some folks over at facebook.com/AlexandAutos thought it was unfair to compare something like this Outlander to the RAV4 because the Outlander is available with a teeny tiny third row, but not in the plug-in hybrid version. So when we're talking about hybrid on hybrid, this is available only as a 5-passenger vehicle, and it's really not that much larger than the RAV4 over there. This is 184.8 inches long, the RAV4 just under 181. So we're only talking about 3.8 inches of difference overall. And the RAV4 is actually a little bit wider than the Outlander, making it a little bit more comfortable on the inside than the Mitsubishi. Moving to the rear, the overall design of the Mitsubishi is perhaps a little bit more conservative than the RAV4's. I still think this looks elegant, even though it does look just a little bit older than the RAV4. Behind this hatch right here, we have relatively similar amounts of cargo room, 38.4 cubic feet in this Mitsubishi here, because the third row has been deleted, and then we have that 12 kilowatt hour battery pack right back there. Over here in the RAV4, we have theoretically 39.5 cubic feet of storage space right back there. A little bit more, but we fit the same number of 24-inch roller bags in the back of the RAV4. Now, it is worth noting that over here in the Mitsubishi Outlander, things are just a little bit tighter. These 4 bags right across the back, you do have to really wedge them in, and it's an awful lot easier to fit these 4 bags across the back of the RAV4 because the RAV4 is a little bit wider overall than the Mitsubishi. So if we push these bags back here in the RAV4, they're not as snug as they are over there. It's also worth noting that because of the Mitsubishi's older design, the power hatch does take up some of the space right here in the opening, and Toyota has integrated it very nicely and neatly into these power struts right here. Both vehicles offer rear seats that have 2 different levels of recline that allows you to square off the cargo area right like that so you can fit more items back here. But under the load floor of the Mitsubishi, we do not find a spare tire at all. Instead, we find just a storage space where you could put your charging cable. That's because the big battery pack is right there where the third seat would normally go. Meanwhile, over here in the RAV4, not only do we have a standard spare tire, but as you can see, there's enough room back here for a full-size spare, which is what we've done to the RAV4 that we own. Overall seating position is pretty comparable between these two vehicles. They definitely have a crossover or SUV-like upright seating position, but we don't have a seat that's as adjustable over here in the Mitsubishi. It is lacking the 2-way adjustable lumbar support that we do see in the RAV4. We do have a tilt telescopic steering column in both models, but we have a slightly larger range of motion in the RAV4. Overall, I definitely found the RAV4 seats to be a little bit more comfortable for the driver and the front passenger. When you're taking a look at the spec sheet, it would appear that the RAV4, if you get the optional moonroof, which we do have, has a serious reduction in rear headroom. But I think those numbers are wrong on Toyota's website because I found no difference in the distance between my head and the ceiling in this model or in a model without the power moonroof. I still have easily about 2.5 inches of overall headroom left. Now, it does dish in right here, but that's not where my head goes when I'm sitting in the rear. The RAV4 is a slightly wider vehicle overall than the Mitsubishi, and that is noticeable when you try and put adults and child seats together in the rear, because there's just a little bit more room back here for these seats. It's worth noting that even though the RAV4 has more combined legroom than we see in the Outlander plug-in hybrid, we still don't have enough room back here for a 6-foot person to be sitting up front and have a rear-facing child seat behind them. If that situation describes you, you might want to look at the next category up, something a little bit bigger along the lines of a Santa Fe or a Ford Edge. Overall, the interior of the Outlander definitely feels like it comes from a slightly older era when it comes to the overall shapes and design of the components in the dashboard. We do have a decent number of soft-touch plastics on the dashboard, but there are hard plastics lower, just as we see in the RAV4. We have this imitation carbon fiber trim on the dashboard, and then moving over to the center, we have a smaller LCD infotainment system than we find in the RAV4, but this does feature smartphone integration, which really helps bring up the tech in this cabin. The rest of the system, rather unfortunately, does seem a little bit slower and a little bit less intuitive than than what we see in the RAV4, although we do have some really handy screens here that show you where the energy is going, your eco information, the energy monitor, etc. We did have some periods of time where this system wasn't as responsive, however. It did have periods where it would freeze. Below that, we have an eco mode button, the controls for the 2-zone automatic climate control, and then continuing on down the dashboard, we find some button blanks down there, 2 decently sized cup holders, although they are a little bit close together for some large takeout drinks. There's nowhere really to put your smartphone other than those cup holders right there. And then we have a joystick style shifter, very similar to what we see really in Toyota's Prius lineup. So we pull over to the left and then pull down for drive. Park is a button behind. The Mitsubishi steering wheel is a 4-spoke design rather than the 3-spoke design that we see in the Toyota. There are no adaptive cruise control buttons on this steering wheel because we don't have that particular option on this trim. But again, all RAV4 models will have that particular feature. Behind the steering wheel, we have some of the best paddles that I have really seen in any car. These are metal, they have a really great feel to them, and this is a feature that I really love in hybrid and plug-in hybrid vehicles because these adjust the regen braking in 6 different levels. We can regen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or turn it completely off. We lower the lift-off regen with this paddle right over here on the right side of the steering wheel. We raise it with the paddle over here on the left side. When it comes to going a little bit further off the beaten path, the Outlander and the RAV4 hybrid are really well matched, actually. Even though we have a little bit more power available for the rear axle in this Outlander, you're not really needing more than about 90 pound-feet of torque back there when you're going up trails like this at around 5 or 10 miles an hour. So the power level available in the RAV4 is just fine. The RAV4 also has more ground clearance than we find in this model. An inch may not sound like a great deal, but it will help you get over some of those tougher obstacles. The Outlander also has slightly longer overhangs versus the RAV4 because this is a slightly longer vehicle overall, and it does reduce the overall off-road ability. But logically, neither of these vehicles is designed for tackling the Rubicon Trail or doing any sort of serious rock crawling. One thing that you really will notice in the Outlander, however, versus the RAV4 is that when you really do start losing traction on the front axle in this, you don't have to be as aggressive on the throttle as you do in the RAV4. And that's because in order for the RAV4 to be able to send more power to the rear, the engine really has to spin up in order to do that. That's just due to the way that those motor generator units are designed in the RAV4. And over here in the Mitsubishi, we have a bigger battery pack, and that battery pack can send the power to the rear without spinning the engine up. Out on a rougher road like we're on here, the suspension tuning in the Outlander is definitely a little bit softer than in the RAV4, but the suspension feels a little bit more upset over bumps. So I'd call it a pretty even tie between these two vehicles. The RAV4 is a little bit less comfortable, but the suspension feels an awful lot more composed than what we see in the Outlander. The differing design of these hybrid systems is instantly obvious when you get the RAV4 and the Outlander back-to-back out on the same road. The RAV4 is significantly faster 0 to 60, 7.5 seconds versus 9 seconds in this Outlander, and the noises and the way that the hybrid system behaves is quite different. We get a more linear feel in the RAV4. It feels somewhat like an EV, as I've said before, but this Outlander definitely feels like an EV, and that's because below 42 miles an hour, it absolutely positively is. There is no way for the engine to mechanically power the wheels below about 42 to 45 miles an hour or so. As with the first generation Chevy Volt, that means that we get a lot of engine noise coming from under the hood because the engine sound is not always a linear relationship to the way that your foot is on the throttle pedal or the speed that you're going because of that serial hybrid system. And this engine doesn't produce as much power as the RAV4's engine, so it has to rev even higher to give us what we want when the battery is depleted. In contrast, the RAV4 hybrid system definitely feels more civilized. It's also swifter 0 to 60 and, importantly, 0 to 30 as well. Definitely feels swifter off of those stoplight races. Even though the Outlander is nearly 500 pounds heavier than the Toyota RAV4, our braking scores surprised me a little bit. This took less distance to stop from 60 miles an hour back to 0, 128 feet versus 131 in the RAV4. I suspect some of that has to do with the overall suspension design, perhaps the ride height in the RAV4, but some of it also may have to do with the way that regen braking is done in the Toyota. Toyota's regenerative braking system is not as smooth or as well polished as the Mitsubishi system, or indeed as other hybrids that we see out there. In some braking maneuvers, it can feel like there's a bit of a disconnect between the regen system and the friction brakes in the car, and we don't see that in the Mitsubishi. We also have these absolutely excellent regen brake paddles here on the back of the steering wheel. I absolutely love these. These paddles affect throttle lift-off regeneration, so they won't take you to a complete stop. But when you lift your foot off of the accelerator pedal, the amount of regen braking you get at that moment, that's what these paddles control. You can do an absolute coasting maneuver where there is no regen at all, or you can get some pretty aggressive regen where the brake lights will even turn on. In the RAV4, you cannot adjust the lift-off regen. If you put the car into the B mode, which is available there in the shifter in the center console of the RAV4, that uses the engine to help engine brake. It does not simply bump up the regen braking. When it comes to handling ability, the RAV4 is absolutely the winner here. It feels more connected to the driver out on the road. We get less body roll, less tip and dive, and the suspension overall feels much more polished than what we see in the Outlander. Toyota has really done an excellent job tuning the RAV4 suspension, and it is an awful lot more engaging than any RAV4 that came before it. In our cabin noise testing, the RAV4 collects another win. We got 71 decibels at 50 miles an hour in that cabin, 73 in the Mitsubishi Outlander. The Mitsubishi has a little bit more wind noise in the cabin, a little bit more road noise, and then if the engine is running, we definitely get more engine noise in the cabin as well. When it comes to fuel economy, the RAV4 is again the clear winner here at 40.5 miles per gallon in our testing, about 26 mpg in this Outlander plug-in hybrid. And that's of course not plugging in the Outlander at all. If you are plugging in the Outlander, then you'll be getting about 2 to 2.3 miles per kilowatt hour. That is definitely on the low side of things for a plug-in hybrid vehicle. Bottom line out on the road, if you want to drive electric only, the Outlander plug-in hybrid is the way to go. But if you're interested in getting better economy overall, then that's definitely going to be in the RAV4. The RAV4 also really impresses in this current generation with its improved driving dynamics over the last generation of the RAV4, a relatively quiet cabin, and a decent amount of power. We get 219 horsepower and about a full second and a half faster 0 to 60 times than we get in the Mitsubishi Outlander. It really is a great combination, but it's up against some tough competition because again, there's some new entries coming for the 2020 calendar year. When it comes to price, these two models are a little bit closer than it may appear. This Mitsubishi starts at $36,095, but it qualifies for a federal tax credit of $5,836 and additional state and local incentives depending on where you live across the country. That could put the effective price of this Outlander plug-in hybrid below the $28,100 base price of this hybrid RAV4 over here. Remember that a regular hybrid vehicle does not qualify for any federal tax credits. Although depending on where you live, there may be some additional local incentives. They're generally pretty rare across the country. The only one of these two options that's going to be able to drive in the carpool lane across the country is also going to be this Mitsubishi right over here. So definitely keep that in mind. Although the Mitsubishi may not be as inexpensive to operate as the RAV4, you will be able to drive this solo in the carpool lane in California, New York, and a number of other states, and you won't be able to do that in the RAV4 hybrid. Depending on the area you live in, your desire for all-wheel drive, and the availability of carpool lanes, that could be a serious consideration in favor of the Mitsubishi. Now, as we have them configured right here, this Outlander ended up significantly more expensive even after the tax credit than the RAV4 that we own. Bottom lining these two vehicles is pretty easy for me. If you want the carpool access, if you want the EV availability, that's what you get in the Mitsubishi. If you want lower cost of operation, lower cost of acquisition, high fuel economy, etc., that's going to be right over here in the RAV4. The RAV4 is also ever so slightly less capable off-road, but the difference is so small that it really wouldn't bother me where I live. The RAV4 is also able to tow a little bit more. It has a slightly more comfortable rear seat, a slightly larger cargo area in the back, more ground clearance, and the availability of a spare tire, which is definitely a key consideration for me. Now, if this Mitsubishi over here was able to get about 10 miles per gallon better fuel economy, or perhaps go about 30 miles on a battery charge, then I think that would help tip the scales. But in this generation, we're talking about a vehicle that can go 22 miles on the battery charge, and after which it gets 25 miles per gallon. That is significantly lower than the RAV4, and that's really why my top pick here would have to be the RAV4 hybrid for 2019 or 2020, unless you really needed the plug-in ability. But I would say if you need the plug-in ability and you can wait, then keep in mind that we will have some other plug-in hybrid options for 2020. The caveat there, of course, is that those are not going to likely be all-wheel drive, and this Mitsubishi Outlander, again, is a plug-in hybrid with all-wheel drive, something that you won't find for sure in the new Ford Escape plug-in hybrid, and we likely will not find in the RAV4 plug-in hybrid either. If you haven't already done so, be sure and hit that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen, because I will have complete reviews on the RAV4 plug-in hybrid, the Honda CR-V hybrid, and of course the Ford Escape plug-in hybrid just as soon as we can get our hands on them. But don't expect any of those alternative hybrids or plug-in hybrids to be on sale for at least 6 months after you watch this video. And that's again why we're comparing the RAV4 hybrid to this Outlander plug-in hybrid. Be sure and stay tuned also for additional follow-up videos on this RAV4 long-term vehicle. We hope to be driving this about 15 or 20,000 miles over the next 9 months. We're doing a number of road trips, a number of direct comparison videos, just like this one here. So again, hit that subscribe button, find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and I will see you all later.